So Dr. Coates, forgive me for not giving your full allotment of time, but we're really pleased that you're here, an economist specializing in monetary policy. Speaking of the University of Chicago, you received your PhD there, and you've advised central banks, been at the IMF, where you were the assistant director of monetary and capital markets, leading missions in over 20 countries. So it's really important to us that there's real life experience. We've got theory, we've got real life experience, and our goal is to get to real solutions. So Dr. Coates, we look forward to maybe a little bit shorter, but we don't want to constrain you too much. We want to hear from you, and thank you for continuing this conversation.
Well, thank you for putting this on. Thank you for having me here. Thank you for removing the need for me to elaborate a lot of the background for what I want to propose. And in fact, the speakers today have laid a very good foundation, covered much of the material that I otherwise would have had to. Let me summarize very briefly and then elaborate just a couple of new elements that I would like to add to the discussion. Broad overview summary is that the replacement of fixed exchange rates under the gold standard with a floating exchange rates and inflation targeting has not worked out well, and that's been discussed extensively today. We need to return to money with fixed exchange rates tightly tied to a hard anchor, and I will elaborate on that. To avoid the weaknesses of the gold standard that ultimately led to its abandonment in the mid-1970s, we need to replace discretionary monetary policy with currency board rules for maintaining the value of national currencies to that of a hard anchor. And that's the heart and soul of it, the currency board rules by which money, whatever anchor it's linked to, is regulated, and that will require a little bit further elaboration. I'm sorry Steve had to leave for something else because he's been the primary champion of currency boards around the world, and his advocacy, I think, was played an important role in the adoption of currency board rules by a number of central banks, some that I have been involved in helping to set up those rules. The U.S. dollar and any other national currency should be replaced in international reserves, and these are the points that you just made and Lou Euler made very eloquently in the video, by an internationally issued currency following the same currency board rules and fixed to the same anchor. That gives us, essentially one monetary unit in currency globally. These steps would establish a market-driven international currency with a much better prospect of surviving than would a return to the gold standard, and economic efficiency and growth would benefit from the establishment of such a fixed exchange rate system. So let me flip through here to the elements of reform to the IMF's SDR, special drawing right, that I think would be essential for transforming it into something that has been of very little interest and played a negligible role in the world, to being able to fulfill the aspirations for it when it was created, which was to basically to, at a minimum, supplement the growth in dollars in international reserves, or more broadly, replace the dollar in international reserves with an internationally issued unit. The key essential feature, and it comes to the criticisms that you made of the existing SDR. But first, let me just dwell for a moment on the existing SDR. The existing SDR is allocated on the basis of a high majority decision of the IMF's membership to allocate them to the members in accordance with a formula. It's allocated in accordance with the quotas of these members, which reflect their economic importance and size in the world economy. This is a very clever but terribly flawed mechanism. It means that periodically in a political decision, economically based presumably, it's spread around. It would be impossible to highly unlikely that the amount of SDRs each member country is getting matches their demand for reserves. Therefore, the IMF had to impose a lot of administrative rules for how and when they could be used to be sure that if somebody wanted to use them, they had a proper reason and somebody else was forced to take them. This made for an extremely unattractive instrument to replace dollars in international reserves. So I would replace, the most fundamental change in the system that I have been advocating for some time is to replace the allocation mechanism that now exists with issuing SDRs according to currency board rules. Now, what that means is that the International Monetary Fund would have no authority whatsoever to decide when to increase or decrease the size of SDRs. That would be a market decision. That's how a currency board works. The gold standard in a somewhat more disciplined version than the world actually had would be an example of a currency board anchored to gold. A currency board, for those not familiar with how they work, issues its currency whenever anyone wants to buy it at its fixed price, the price fixed to the whatever it's anchored to. The Central Bank of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which I led the teams that set up, is a currency board fixed initially to the German mark, and when the German mark was replaced by the euro, it's now fixed to the euro. So anytime anyone in Bosnia or anytime anyone anywhere in the world would like to have more, Aki, what's the damn currency called? The Bosnian, no, it's, convertible marca. It was I tried to repress it from my memory because there was long conversations, difficult conversations with our Bosnian counterparts, the Serbian, Croat, and Bosniak trio that had been previously at civil war over every element of creating this currency board. And one, to an economist, totally trivial element would be, what do you call it? What's its name? So we went through every possible decent name, something that might have a little bit of history or, something that gave it some kind of meaning. All of those were immediately disqualified by at least one of the three groups. So at the end of the day, the U.S. Treasury, my memory is totally failing. Aki, who's the deputy managing director of the IMF now? David Lipton. David Lipton. David Lipton was in the U.S. Treasury, sort of overseeing the U.S. involvement in dealing with these issues in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And so at the last minute, when there was no decent name around, he proposed the convertible marca. Okay, it's a horrible name, but it's not very important what it's called, but that's what it's called. That's why I try not to remember it. Anyone in the world at any time who would like to have more of that currency can have all they want at its officially designated price. They buy, and that's how the gold standard worked as well. If you wanted more US dollars or any other currency fixed to gold, you could buy more of them with the appropriate amount of gold. That's a currency board system, and if you find that you have more than you really care for at the moment because of market conditions or for whatever, the central bank redeems them. They take them back at the same price. In other words, the central bank has no authority, no power whatsoever to have any influence over the supply of the currency that it oversees. It is 100% totally determined and regulated by the market. That is the system that I think would transform politically the political perceptions or concerns or fears about having an international body like the IMF have the authority to issue whenever they feel like it a currency. Taking that away, imposing currency board rules, I think would be transformative. It would alleviate the need for any administrative rules that the fund now has about how and when you can use the SDRs, because people only hold the amount they want. The other element is the anchor. What would be, it could be gold, for example. In my opinion, that would be a dramatic improvement over where we are now. So I would not fight choosing gold as the anchor. But gold is not the most stable anchor one could find. Gold prices have moved a great deal. I can't remember whether they moved more or less than oil, probably less than oil, but they move a lot. So it's not a very stable anchor. Certainly better than a lot of potential alternatives, better than the discretion of the central bank to try and guess, and especially to push things around. But a broader basket of goods and services rather than a portfolio of only one commodity would provide greater stability. And since what people generally think of when they think about the stability of the value of a currency is its purchasing power and the measure that countries take of the purchasing power of their currency is a consumer price index. So I would suggest that we look at a CPI basket of internationally traded and consumed goods around the world as the basis for the anchor. But I really think while it's important to try and get the best possible anchor that provides the greatest stability for the currency and certainly greater ability to forecast how that value will behave over time is important, there are a wide number of potential baskets that would do a decent job. So to me, that's the secondary item of importance compared to issuing it by currency board rules. That is really the essence. And well, now I don't remember whether it was somebody's video or one of the previous speakers, but I think Bob Mundell has made this point many times also, that if the leader has a currency and unit that behaves well and predictably, and the U.S.'s dollar has not done badly in that regard, but we've seen many shortcomings. Many other countries then will adopt it and choose it. So what I have in mind is that the IMF would reform its SDRs to be issued under currency board rules. They would replace the 5 currency basket as the basis for the value of the SDR with a CPI basket or something in that spirit. And this could, and there are some concrete steps that would facilitate it, replace the dollar in international reserves. That would be the international reserves currency. It's unimaginable that oil, copper, many other globally traded commodities wouldn't be priced in SDRs rather than dollars. I wake up every morning and look at the oil price and wonder, gee, did it change because the dollar changed, or did the price of oil really change? Well, you shouldn't have to ask that question. With that as the international reserve asset, it would be very, very natural for all or most or a large number of countries to voluntarily choose to peg their currency to that one rather than pegging it to the dollar or the euro or the other currencies they now peg to. And the nature of money is that its usefulness rests heavily on how broadly the same currency is accepted and used. Therefore, there's a natural propensity to have one dominant currency in any market or the global market. So I would see that as the outline of steps toward resolving, answering Mr. Lehrman's challenge to us of what do we replace our dysfunctional floating exchange rate system with. This is what I propose. And I think I did it in about half or less.
Thank you, Warren. And